Hello, everybody. Welcome to a great webinar from the team at Reuters Events with their focus on insurance. We have a wonderful mix of people to talk about something really important. I'm going to go over that all in a second, but I wanted to welcome all of you to this discussion, which is part of the lead up to the Future of Insurance Canada happening in Toronto in September. Make sure that you register for that if you're in the area or can get to the area. That is going to be an invaluable conversation. I've just come back from the US version, and I can tell you it was really, really amazing. Fantastic networking, fantastic insights, super valuable. So hopefully we can see you all there. And if today is any taste of that, which I'm sure it will be, you're going to want to be at that event. So what are we here to talk about today? Well, we are talking about the need for resilient digital strategy, which is something that's been so front and center for all of us and feels like, it's a must-have to excel in the industry. It's become table stakes, really. This digital transformation, the buzzword that keeps going around, obviously so front and center for everyone, carriers, brokers, agents, solution providers around, as we look at modernizing our organizations and to really take that chance to find those opportunities to move ahead of competition instead of just the same old share stealing that we've always been doing, for decades or centuries in the industry. And it's about our back-end operations. It's about our front end, our customer experience, another buzzword that's been so front and center. It's about our products. It's about everything. And we have a great conversation from the panel here today to talk about all this. I am your moderator for today's conversation. I'm Brian Falchuk. I'm the managing partner of Insurance Evolution Partners and the author of the book series, The Future of Insurance from Disruption to Evolution. I'm very lucky to be joined by our three panelists today. We have Hashmat Rohian, who's the Vice President and CTO for the Emerging Business Models at the Cooperators. We have Lisa Joy Trick, who is the Service Design Lead at Westland Insurance, and Sam Passafiume, who is the Senior Director and Head of Data and Information for RBC Insurance. And we're going to hear some opening thoughts from each of them on the subject. And then it's all about the questions that you, the audience, want us talking about. So use that Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, not the chat, the Q&A. Pop your questions in there, and you don't have to wait till we get to the Q&A portion of the webinar. You can ask those questions as soon as they come to mind, and I'll be watching those to make sure we pull out the questions from all of you to put to the panel to grill them on, to hear their thoughts on this really important topic that is so central to every carrier, every person who's engaged in this industry right now in Canada and more broadly, of course. But with that, I want to turn to Hashmat first to open things up and share some thoughts from your perspective from the cooperators as you look at digital transformation and all the things that means to us in the business. Hashmat, over to you.
Thank you, Brian. It's a pleasure being with you all here. As you mentioned, digital transformation has been quite a bit of a buzzword for the last decade or even more than that. COVID-19 has really accelerated how insurance carriers, brokers, MGAs, and other partners have looked at digital transformation. And it has forced them to really rethink how they conceptualize the product, how they deliver value. A lot of if you look at it from a consumer perspective, a lot of our consumers' expectations have also changed with COVID-19. The last best experience that they have had with any provider is now set the bar for any experience they expect from any partner. So if the last best digital experience they've had with a retailer is what they expect from an insurer or a telco. So that is what the expectations have changed. On top of that, the competition has also changed. There are new business models, fintechs, insurtechs that have come in. And there are adjacent business model, emerging business models that have come in and has forced insurance carriers to rethink how they still remain relevant in this market. And it has, focused attention on how do we deliver, how do we manufacture a protection product and evolve that thinking, that protection thinking to a prevention and resiliency thinking. And how do we then distribute that product? Do we need to own all our channels? How do we play in other partners' ecosystems, for example? That has forced, especially with alternative channels, data differentiated products. How does a company, a traditional carrier, still remain relevant and evolve from a linear pipeline business model to a more networked platform-based business model? So those are some of the questions that have forced organizations to either accelerate or really rethink and reimagine their digital journey. On top of that, it has, to an extent, it has forced organizations in the insurance industry to really return to the basics. If we were starting a carrier from scratch, we would all be looking at product market fit. As organizations age, you develop infrastructure, you develop technological, operational, and social, debt and legacy. Versus as we build bigger balance sheet, we have a recognized brand. The thinking moves from product market fit to product organization fit. How do we avoid that trap? How do we make sure that the questions we are asking ourselves as leaders in the insurance are still focused on what is best for the customer, what will keep us relevant and ahead of our competition, and always focused on that product market fit, and forcing us to think about, are we doing something? Are we building a feature because it's easiest for us or because it creates the most value for our customers? A lot of time when we apply technology or data, the question we get, some remarks we get is, we can't do that feature or add that feature because our technology doesn't support it. Or we know this won't fly with customers, but we have committed those facts. MGAs, brokers, and partners in the insurance industry have realized is everybody has to become a technology company to an extent. We have to think of technology, embedding technology, infusing technology in our business strategy. There is no business strategy and technology strategy. There's a business strategy and technology is infused in it. So that kind of thinking also has been accelerated because of COVID, and carriers, you have to really rethink it. Ultimately, I believe the job of our leaders, as leaders in the insurance company, the job to do is, how do we help the organizations, how do we empower and position organizations and our organizations well and through an orderly transition in this changing market landscape. So we have to have transition, but it has to be orderly because we do have large businesses to run, maintain, modernize, and optimize while developing new business models. So those are some of the key thoughts and concerns on top of leaders' minds and taking a lot of their mind share as we are contemplating our digital transformation.
Hashmat, you made a comment about this move from product market fit to, was it product organization fit or product company fit? Or it really struck me. I get to work with a lot of startups and they're still so very product market fit focused and trying to figure that out. And then we think about, once we sort of get in the routine of things, and for some of us, we've got decades or 100-year plus kind of histories, we get in this iteration cycle where it's more about what we need to do because of a regulatory requirement, because of a loss situation we're in, and we need to affect a better combined ratio, or because of something going on internally that we need to accommodate. And it's so easy to lose sight of, well, did the customer even want this, or does this even speak to that need? I think that's a brilliant point. And it has been a period of re-recognizing the need to engage that way as customers' bars have gone up so dramatically for their
Absolutely. And Brian, just to add to that point you made, they are not mutually exclusive of each other. You can be product market focused as well as product company or organization focused. But if we keep ourselves first, eventually we will find ourselves last.
Yeah.
So that is one thing we have to really think about. Why do we exist? And as we grow, we have to always go back to those basics: customer needs, unmet needs. Are we still relevant? I'm
writing down that quote: if we put ourselves first, eventually we will find ourselves last. And no pressure on the rest of the panel to come up with quotable moments. But I think that's something we all need to remember is it's not about what we want or what we can do or what we need. Ultimately, if it's not something that the customers care about, there's no point to it. We're not going to succeed. Thank you so much for those comments, Hashmat. And hopefully that's brewing some questions for the audience, which is a friendly reminder. Throw your questions in the Q&A. With that, Lisa, I'd love to turn to you and hear some of your thoughts from your perspective at Westland.
Thanks, Brian, and that was great. Yeah, I love that quote as well. And it ties into so much of how we think about digital transformation as client-centric. And that digital transformation journey for us at Westland has been very much about the holistic picture, the client experience, as well as the internal capacities and the people, and how we're nurturing and growing our own teams. And that's where the service design practice has been really valuable in mapping out the client experience and the client journey, and then all of the service blueprints that fall under that. How do we blend our brick and mortar experiences with our digital experiences to provide that kind of intended digital journey? And I think what you mentioned, Hashmat, about the new business models and client expectation pressures, we're all feeling those and aware of those, and it provides this opportunity to go back to the drawing board and to kind of imagine like what's the potential for our industry moving forward. And with our organization, I think we're finding that and thinking about the values of our organization, what makes it unique and even precious, especially as we've grown and we've acquired different other organizations and teams and services, we learn like what about that service is unique and special and worth maintaining, and then maybe even building on and replicating digitally. And through the service journey mapping and through client research, we can learn more about like which exact experiences are unique and special to our clients, and not necessarily lose all of that sort of brick and mortar experience that so many of our smaller brokerages that we've acquired have really built up and are important to our clients. So then the question then becomes, how can we maximize the people and the brokerages that are doing this work with technology, and how can our technology transformation really be about building up those existing kind of unique experiences? We are doing a number of larger projects or programs right now to build up our technology capabilities. And I'll talk to you maybe a little bit about how we're doing those and what makes, how we're engaging our stakeholders in those processes. So we are implementing a few large technology projects that will build the base for us to do more multi-channel and collaborative supporting of our clients. And in those projects, we think about how to engage the stakeholders early on. So we've been, doing a lot of process mapping with them before we get into the implementation, so that our requirements aren't, necessarily technology requirements exclusively, but they're also people requirements. What do people need to do their day-to-day work? And then testing with those people all along the way, more of a co-design and collaborative process, instead of just pushing technology onto a team and expecting that they're just going to, roll with it. So I think that's a big piece of how we are implementing technology differently towards transformation. And we've also recently launched our first client portal, which we're using as our clients get up and running on that, we're looking at their feedback and iterating quickly when we see something that is or isn't working. That feedback comes through the format of digital analytics or direct feedback, and those feedback loops are very important to us. So we're monitoring and looking at those daily and just figuring out how to kind of continue to enhance based on what we're seeing. And to do that, we had to build, a certain amount of agile capability. And as we begin other platform projects, we're thinking about how to build that agile capability and that kind of solid user group to start with, so that we have intelligence about the people we're designing for, whether that's the brokers, B2B business, or the clients themselves, the end clients. And that comes through kind of our voice of client program and having a whole bunch of strong feedback loops in place so that we have the intelligence to kick off projects and technology implementations that are built on that foundation of what clients need.
Lisa Joy, I think it's a good reminder of the point Hashmat was saying about the client focus, so that ultimate end insured and what their needs really are. But then when you talk about agile, yes, it's an IT delivery and software development kind of mentality, but it's so much bigger than that. And you can't just make it be about how the tech is being delivered, developed and deployed. You're talking about it about your people and the way the business users are engaged in that work as well. It sounds like it's sort of a transformative kind of philosophy for the organization as a whole about change and about innovation. Is that how you're seeing it?
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like that there's in our organization, there's support from top of the leadership down towards where everyone is open, genuine, heartfelt thoughts about how can we support one another through change. And so that starts from the inside out. And then I think that communicates to the clients too, sort of, we're trying this new thing. Can you let us know what you think? And just a listening ear, really. And I feel like that active listening capacity can be within organizations and can really build the environment for strong technology transformation. Yeah,
no, that's brilliant. I totally agree. I mean, it is it's not just about the customers holistically, but also your own people holistically. You have to kind of encapsulate everything to make that change in the kinds of ways we're talking about this digital transformation. It's not just a top-down or IT focused change.
It's a lot to ask people who've been doing something the same way for 30 years to shift. And I feel like that's something I'm really, really grateful for anyone who's willing to give that a go. It's not an assumption that we can just make that people are going to be able to shift. So that willingness for someone to say, okay, I'm going to think about doing things differently, even though I've done something the same way for a long time, is pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, I think many of us have been in that position lately, the past couple of years, about doing things differently than we've done them before. And in this industry, especially, it's not an industry of doing things differently historically. Sam, I'd love your perspective. As you look at things at RBC, I'm curious. We've got very different perspectives from everyone here. In terms of the organization you're in, and Sam, even for you, I'm just thinking about the bank connection. Does that come into play at all? But very, very excited to hear your thoughts.
Thanks, and I agree. I love the perspectives that are shown here, and I come at it with a very different perspective, being the head of data and information, so engineering, science, analytics, insight. I'll start with the bank. There's in Canada we have a Bank Act, so it really inhibits the information that we can use with the bank. And share with the bank from a data perspective. However, RBC is one of the leading financial institutions, not only in Canada, but around the world in terms of, the investment in our capabilities within the digital sphere. So there's obviously from that perspective, quite a bit that we can learn and share with the bank, and it really helps enable what we do within insurance. But if I reel it back to very specifically RBC Insurance and the perspective we bring to delivering value, creating that resiliency, and how we work with Lisa Joy's team or teams like Lisa Joy's or Hashmat's. It's really interesting on how we leverage this data to do so. And we're all in this common pursuit of delivering the right information to the right place at the right time. And this is how I coach the team. And obviously, there's a lot of questions on what does that mean. So I thought I'd spend a couple minutes explaining that and what it means and how we work with the rest of the organization to do so. So to start, I'll go backwards and talk about the right time. You heard Lisa Joy speak about the client journey, client experience. And the client journey is something we really narrow in on because a journey is sequential, a journey is chronological. And when you think of timing, the most effective client journey is providing the client or a user, if we're talking about digital, it can also be employees, the right information when they need it to make that decision, to take that action, to be able to progress down that client journey in a favorable experience. And then when you go back one more step, we're talking about the right place, and Hashmat already hit on it. That right place is no longer, or doesn't necessarily mean on our infrastructure, on our platforms. It could be an API to an appropriate MGA. It's delivering that data to the place that the consumer, the user wants it to be. So again, we're always looking to make it easy, that frictionless kind of environment. And then going back to the right information, this one's the most elusive. If anybody has ever looked up definition of information, even on Google, there's a plethora. I mean, there's a lot of different kinds of definitions. There's also a lot of inconsistency within the definition. So the one that I love to follow is really that scientific one, where your biologies, your chemistries, your theoretical physics, they all tend to agree that information must be causal. So we're getting some kind of information and taking action or making a decision off of it. So again, the information we're trying to deliver is the kind of information that's going to help somebody appropriately act, or lack of action is also appropriate in this case. Now, when we work backwards in terms of how do we use all this great data, all this great information to create value, again, it starts with teams like Hashmats. I mean, they're the ones that have these platforms. They're the ones that have these screens that people are typing information into and clicking enter. This then converts that information to a whole bunch of ones and zeros. And this is where it gets fun, especially on the technology side. I mean, we used to have the data lake. Now we've got clouds and cloud computing and everything that's coming up with that. I mean, AWS, watching them just every single year on year, they're coming up with these incredible new kinds of technology to be able to process and store more data in a more cost-effective way. So of course, working with Hashmat's team to grab all of this wonderful data we're picking up. But there needs to be this next step, and this is where our data engineers come in. So we got all this data, we need to organize it in such a way that we can then convert it back into information for teams like Lisa. I mean, of course, I love that old adage of you can't manage what you can't measure. So being able to bring all of this data we're collecting back to a team like Lisa's to measure that these actions we're taking has that intended impact, allows us to tweak and create that cycle of resiliency, or that cycle of value growth and generation, and value generation, again, for the clients or employees or the business, the business itself. What I really like, though, most recently, let's call it the last 3 to 5 years or so, is the secondary effect this process has, and we spend a lot of time focusing on it, because Lisa's team is always looking for these key metrics we're looking at, whether it's something like a wastage rate or a client experience, or something that we can measure to understand what is driving this business value. It does this wonderful thing for our data scientists. It gives them what they like to call a target. It gives them something that we want to predict. It gives us something that we're trying to build a model off of, so we can then provide that right information to be able to elicit that appropriate action as we're going through. And of course, if we're organizing all the data, now we've got this nice, robust data set that the scientists can go back to. And this cuts off months of development time, right? Instead of the scientists going in, looking for all this disparate data, trying to organize it themselves. Our record right now in RBC is 4 hours to create a model from, hey, we need this model. Can you then predict it? Now, we're not talking about API and all the testing and whatnot. However, to be able to develop a model in half a day is, at least when I saw it, I thought it was incredibly impressive. So then finally, of course, then we get all this rich information. It goes back to Lisa's team. We look where can we implement those models, and the cycle just continues over and over and over again, getting stronger and faster. So this is the approach, and this is how we're using data and analytics, insight, science to really maintain that resilience on all these great things that Lisa Joy's or Hashmat's team are building and implementing.
I had things I wanted to ask you, Sam, but then you blew me away with the 4 hour thing. And I was like, that's incredible. I think it always takes everyone 4 hours. It's just whether it takes another, 3 weeks after that. But you're delivering something in the 4. That is really impressive. And I know that's not always, and that's not the fully baked final answer, but you almost brought up the customer need and the product market fit yet again, in that if we're not thinking about what's the target or the purpose of this analysis or of this model, of this tool, then we end up with what I think we've all seen for so much data we've interacted over the years, or reports we get where you sort of, so you pick it up, you look at it, you sort of nod and you put it down and you move on. And it's like, we got this thing every month, we look at it every month, we nod our head, and then we're done with it. What is the point of that? There's no target, there's no impact, there's no business use, and just like a product that isn't really fitting the market anymore, that we sort of fallen asleep at the wheel. we do that with a lot of data and a lot of reports, and new approaches, new tools is a great chance to rethink, well, what is it we're trying to do with this? Not just to get a report every month that we dismiss, but to actually impact the business. I love that sort of framing of it, of this target ideas. What are you looking for? Not just tell me what data you want me to send you. It's like, well, what are you trying to affect?
Oh, I fully agree. I mean, and again, with the teams like Lisa Joy's, obviously not Lisa Joy, but those in RBC Insurance, we're at the point now where sometimes we'll, a report will come out. That's great. Like you said, you get it, an email, whatnot. But a lot of the leaders now are sitting down with me or my team and actually digging into that. Why? What are the drivers of this? What can we then do? Because a report is a report. It's not very exciting, but being able to influence that action, being able to give that right information when we're looking for it. I mean, it's amazing to see even how things like your NPS scores are affected by things like that.
Yeah. Well, great opening remarks from everyone. And I know they're great because we're already getting questions about them. So that's another subtle hint to the audience. Keep popping your questions in. But we do already have some that I want to ask. And then I've got some that were triggered by everybody's opening remarks. So if the audience doesn't come through, I'm just going to get selfish and ask what I want to know, but they're pouring more questions in, which is great. The first one is, this is an industry of headwinds and handcuffs. We constantly talk about all the ways that we are constrained, and Hashmat, I'm going to start with you, but I'm thinking about your point of, the products maybe were about product market fit, and now it's more about how does it fit with our own company needs. And I think a lot of that comes from, we can't because regulation, politics, systems, what have you. What are the kinds of barriers and roadblocks that you're seeing still today? And are there any that have been sort of historic sacred cow barriers that you've been able to move past in your experience?
There are always constraints to any strategy. I think a strategy without a good understanding of the constraints to those strategies is not a good strategy. That said, there are no constraints that thankfully we have not been able to overcome. So even from a regulatory perspective, as markets emerge, products have to evolve. Our regulators are very open to work with us. Generally with all insurance companies, they're willing to co-innovate. The regulators are also trying to figure out customer needs, how to best protect customers, to draft legislation. So there's a real collaboration between the public sector and private to figure out how to best serve our customers, our clients, our citizens. Cooperatives is a very purpose-driven organization. We are there for a particular purpose. We are a cooperative. So that in itself kind of gives us that, those constraints are not as insurmountable. Of course, there are operational constraints. Once we do decide that we have to transform or optimize something, there are always going to be constraints. I would put them under mostly around execution or operational constraints. Talent is a major constraint, as you probably know, in delivering digital transformation. Finding good digital talent is a bit of a challenge at this point. There's also a few of my colleagues already mentioned journey mapping, making sure you have clear outcomes. You anchor your strategy and what you do in every step to the journey map for the client. And it could be, the client could be an internal client as well. So that's another aspect of it. And then really from a constraint perspective, also thinking through on an operational side, thinking through all the dependencies between the different streams of work, really breaking it down and understanding what are the assumptions made, what are the dependencies, and how do we get ahead of that? What are some contingencies? So there are operational constraints. There are, of course, financial, there are regulatory constraints. There are sometimes even the strategic constraints, meaning, are we doing the right thing? How do we know we're doing the right thing? When do we pivot? How do we move our learnings forward? So there are always going to be constraints. The question is, how do we mitigate those constraints and address them throughout the life of a strategy?
Thank you for that. And I'm curious from the distribution side of the house, and Lisa Joy, if you want to start with that, maybe you live between two worlds of constraints. You've got your own constraints, but then it's also, well, the carrier partners that we're working with, what are they telling us is impossible, or they can't do, or we have to move at their speed? How do you sort through these things?
Yeah, I agree with Hashmat, is that there is more opportunity for collaboration than we may assume right off the bat. And I think the quick question that we always have to ask ourselves is, is that, a myth, or is that a real constraint? And do we have data to substantiate or like evidence that that's a real constraint? I think some of the methods that I would like to consider employing when we're thinking about strategy, and especially like demonstrating a different approach, would be to demonstrate early wins. Like, this isn't new stuff. This is how we do change, right? We demonstrate early wins. We get creative. We go back and check the problem statement and make sure we understand it correctly. We go back and check those assumptions about what our constraints are. And we get super clear on what the objective is. Because, for example, like if we are doing a project and we're trying to work under the constraints of a full digital, quote to bind experience, but actually we're just looking to make a lead generation experience, then that really changes the constraints. That's going to really change the conversation with the carriers. So being super clear about what the objective is that we're after will help us to better check whether those constraints are real or not.
And Sam, what about is it similar then? Because you're both, your organizations are in similar positions in the market. Do you see that the same way, or because you're an internal service, is it different?
So absolutely, we'll see the same constraints from a distribution perspective. But bringing mine into it, that what keeps me up at night the most is what we do with this type of data. Where I'm not sure if I fully agree with Hashmat on the regulatory side. I definitely agree with the insurance regulators. However, there's this wider privacy legislation that is or is not coming through. It is or it is not tabled. I mean, it comes off on the books. And it always leads to that question, even though we are technically able to do something, the big question of should we do it is where we spend a lot of time debating. Right. And of course, being, owned by a bank we're very, very conservative. So even if there's just a whiff, we shouldn't be doing this, or we're not sure, the law's too ambiguous here, then we won't do it. And that's where we tend to see, those constraints, and for very good reason. I mean, you and I, we all have our data and we all want our own privacy, and being that fortress in the position where we need to maintain that type of trust.
Can I press on this? And Hashmat, you can certainly defend your position if you like. And Lisa Joy, I think this hits on something you said as well, is if there's a lack of clarity in the regulation, or the regulation isn't here yet, is this one of these, the sort of like it's industry lore and it's not really a constraint? Or how do you navigate? Because that is a real thing. There's talk about constraints coming in, or there's a horizon that we're all facing. How do you recognize something like that, where technically the constraint is not here today, but we expect we're going to have to live by it at some point? How do you navigate those sorts of, because we deal with that all over the place, whether it's on the insurance side or Sam, great point. Privacy has been one of these constant marching, changing lines that we're going to have to deal with. I'm curious, how do you evaluate these sorts of things?
I can take a stab at that.
Yeah, please, yeah.
I think generally legislation has a principle behind it, right? So like some of the ones I'm thinking about are like accessibility, and recently I was looking at the all-comers auto kind of constraints, and those there's a principle behind it that really makes sense. I think we can all get on board with those principles. Like we want all of our digital experiences to be fully accessible to everyone who wants to partake in the service. And so then I think when we get on board with the principles, then it becomes a lot easier to find room within our project plans to allocate for the additional resources or time it's going to take to get there. And then I think we find ourselves compliant when we take that path first. Why are we doing this? And we all agree, we do want, to continue to make accessible experiences. So then how? It's just the how now. And then it's really then just a checkbox. Does that meet requirements from a legislative perspective? But
yeah, that's a great example of it. Hashmat, some thoughts from you.
Yeah, I would just build on that. I think that taking that principle-based approach rather than applying a rule-based approach always helps preempt upcoming legislation or controls that may have to be put in place. And also organizations, insurance and otherwise, have to take a more broader ethical framework approach on what is the ethical use of data that we have, whether it's data use, privacy. So even being a bit ahead, thinking ahead of, are we doing what's best for our clients? Even if in some cases the legislation might not be there, but is that an ethical thing to do? So there might be some things based on that principle-based approach that Lisa Joy talked about. There may be instances where legally we may be able to do something, but does it make ethical sense to do it? Perhaps the legislation has not caught up.
Yeah, so principles.
Framework, use of data as an example. Those principles definitely go a long way.
Yeah, I think that's excellent. We have more questions that are coming in, so I want to jump to the next one. So this one is about the people side of it, and some of the things we talk about in digital transformation could be seen as helping me do my work, and it could be seen as helping you not have me here to do this work anymore, not need me anymore. So with, and this is not a new idea, I've shared in lots of webinars. I was at a claims conference in the mid 2010s when drones were just starting to come into play in adjusting, and you could see anytime we had Q&A, they were projecting the questions up on a screen, and everything was like, when do I lose my job to drones? When do drones replace me? From all the adjusters that were there in the conference. So it's this sort of thing is, how do we engage our people, our organization, our frontline staff in digital transformation, in a lot of the deployment of new tools that are coming to be, and not have them feel like you're ushering in your own demise. Is this something that any of you has faced or thought about? How do we engage our people in this transformation when some of them may be thinking like, am I just bringing about the end of my employment?
Maybe I can start us off, and then
Sure.
Others can chime in. One of the projects that I did or worked on a couple of years ago was around applying artificial intelligence technologies to optimize, for example, some of the short tail conversations that would come to our call center. How can we automate that? So you're absolutely right. When folks do hear artificial intelligence, they think, am I being automated out of my job? The way I think of artificial intelligence is not just purely artificial intelligence. That general AI has not come to the point where it can replace a human judgment. However, the way I think of AI is more augmented and assisted intelligence. How can we help you automate those parts of your work that are low value so that you can focus on the high value parts of your job? How can we, some of those routine, mundane tasks, how can we take that off of your table so you can have those real conversations with your customers rather than having to fill a form? So engaging in those conversations about enabling and empowering your people rather than not having those proactive conversations and allowing folks to make an assumption that they are being automated out of their job goes a long way. Again, technology is there to serve the strategy and serve the clients. So when we engage, and I engage our people, again, the question goes back to what problem are we solving? What job is there to be done? And how can we enable and empower you through the use of data technologies and more broad emerging technologies to focus so that you can focus on what you do best?
Perspectives from the rest of the panel. Yeah, Sam.
I would fully agree. I mean, I use AI in my everyday life as well, and it's a tool. It's just like any other tool that we can use. We're bombarded with all kinds of data and information at all times, whether it's in our job to do something very specific or just in general life. And having the confidence of using the AI not to make the decision, but to provide everything we need to make that decision, especially on the more complex. Hashmat, I don't even know if I'm going to be retired by the time we get general AI, and I'm very likely we will. But we've seen many times that AI is wonderful at helping people prioritize their workload and taking away the lesser work, the easy stuff. And that's what we need people for. People are brilliant. People are way smarter than AI. And so there's no way to be replaced in the near term.
Yeah, I agree with what both of you said. It's really about helping people see their role as shifting, not disappearing, shifting from administrative and, to in our case, we say advisory. We go from administrative to advisory. That it's really about, engaging all of the value that they bring, and using technology as aids. What I find is that they're often feeling overwhelmed to start with. They're being asked to know so much and respond so quickly now. So bringing aids to the process is they're inviting that. They're eager to have support of any kind of technology that's going to make that process more quickly. And the reality is, when we implement technology, we don't get it all right. And there's often things we do that make things harder for them first before it gets easier. So having them engage in the process around feedback about that and saying, this thing you thought would make my life better is not making my life better, that we have to hear that from them and then change it. Not every technology solution is perfect out of the gate. And in the meantime, once we do start to make their jobs more efficient, there's still so much work to do. We have a lot of data collection gaps, and quality of our data isn't always amazing. And I feel like there's no way that the need for them disappears, because there's just still so much to do. And I'm sure, I don't think any organization is different from us. I think you always have like a huge backlog of ways you want to improve.
Yeah, for sure.
Just to
yeah.
build on that, a couple of other things do also go a long way. A structured change management program also goes a long way with any technology implementation. Raising an awareness about the need, the problem, the solution, creating a desire, and then building a knowledge action and reinforcing that action goes a long way. So having a structured change management plan and communication plan goes a long way to make adoption of technologies successful. And again, one of the frameworks that have been very helpful for us is design thinking and jobs to be done. So again, anchoring into what is the problem we're solving, taking a problem-centric approach, a people and problem-centric approach rather than a solution-based. So here's a solution, let's find a problem to solve or fit it into. So that we don't want to do the latter. We want to do the people and problem-centric approach rather than a solution-focused approach as well. So those two things do go a long way in making sure that technology is adopted and our people feel empowered and enabled.
That's great. And I don't want to do this, but I'm going to stay on the topic of fears, because we have another fear question. So it's not the fear of being automated out of a job, but it's the fear of malware and the cyber, sort of vulnerability that can be perceived as you go on this digital journey, as you move. It reminds me of the discussion of on-prem versus moving to the cloud. Is a lot of the early discussion was, but that's not secure. That's out there on the internet versus, it's locked away in our facility. And I was always sort of left with this impression that if you think you have better security and understanding of information security than Amazon or Microsoft or, any of the major cloud providers, you should become a cloud provider, because that, they have a much higher bar from a cybersecurity standpoint than any individual data center could. And I think a lot of CIOs and CTOs have moved on that and understood that the cloud can be more secure, but the fear is out there. When we digitize, we're creating different vectors for malware, for bad actors to get involved. Is that something that any of you contends with, or you hear coming up, or is that, going back to our first point about barriers, is that an active barrier that any of you faces in your business? And if so, how are you navigating that? Sam, I'll start off with you, because you're living in this data firsthand, and I imagine you're incredibly dependent on a lot of these digital tools to produce these reports and the models.
And to transfer the data, third-party suppliers, of course, how are you moving that data? It's terrifying, right? At the end of the day, somebody getting a hold of your data, shutting or infiltrating your systems is a massive risk. we pour, an unquantifiable amount of resources into preventing this. And you do the best you can, right? Through this, and I'm sure Hashmat can agree. Anytime you're looking at any solution, cybersecurity is always at the table. We run within the organization. We're always running phishing exercises, for example. Who's clicking on that malware? Because it's a real easy way to get into somebody's systems. But at the end of the day, there's always still going to be that risk. I remember hearing a story about one of these security firms, challenging their employees to hack into their system. What they ended up doing, one of the employees ended up doing, was hacked into the security cameras up top and watched him put in his password. Right. So there's always these creative ways to get around it, and you do everything you can to try to prevent it, but that risk, unfortunately, always remains.
I personally, my experience has been that, at least in the projects that I've worked with, security has not been a fear. I mean, if you embrace your fear, I totally understand. I mean, there is always a fear of a security breach. But if we truly embrace that fear can become a passion. So we are passionate about our client data. We want to protect ourselves and our client data. So we make sure for any project that we have proper controls. We take a very risk-based security approach. And similar, when we architect a strategy or a technology solution, as much as we are focused on business data application and technology architecture, security is front and center and is not an afterthought for us. And we engage with it very proactively. And we have mature security practices and partners within the organization and outside the organization that we engage with. And I can also say the solutions that I've worked on have been mostly, I can't think of a on-prem solution that I have worked on implementing over the last period of time that I've worked at the corporate. So everything has been cloud-based, but we have been very diligent, and we remain very diligent about it because we are passionate about our client data, as securing ourselves as well as securing our clients' privacy. And we are being very proactive, and we're building resiliency at the start.
Yeah, I agree with everything that Sam and Hashmat said. It's investing in security. Just like you said, we invest in structured change management. We invest in that security program. We bake security into the design. We consider it with each interaction. We build those strong technology partnerships. And one other thing I'd add is that one thing we've looked at is our user interface and the client feedback. What is the client seeing? And how can we keep affirming to the client that they're in the right place, the right next step is happening, error messages that are really informative, that make them understand they're still with us, they're still on our site. So that whole sort of client experience, to make sure they feel kind of held and with us in the digital journey. And then that way, if anything happens that, that's different or inconsistent, it would flag for them, okay, that's not our standard experience with Westland, something's up.
That's a great point, is finding ways to get the people you're working with to recognize when something's amiss or feels like it's outside. And that can be phishing training. It can be getting them used to your standard way of doing business, which actually can be tricky if you're deploying lots of third-party solutions, but not thinking about the customer experience and how holistic and aligned they feel. Then people may not be trained to recognize, oh, this is weird, this is different, this doesn't look the same. Lisa Joy, if you don't mind, I'm going to stick with you because there's a question that was particularly posed to Westland, but I think actually it does apply to everyone. But since it was raised for Westland, I'll start with you. It's asking, from a broker's perspective, are you looking to sell data back to the markets? And I would broaden this out, that I think for all of us, data, the talk of data as a product has become more front and center. So aside from the insurance products we're selling, is any of you looking at the explosion of digital tools, the addition of data to so many things that we do? Is that creating new product ideas around the data itself, rather than just transferring of risk, or taking a commission on the transfer of risk? Is there thought of the data that's behind all this itself being an empowering product that might be something for the market?
Oh, I feel like I'm not the right person to ask this question. Not that I'm aware of. That's an interesting idea. It's just not something I've been involved in.
Yeah. Hashmat, Sam, any comments from you on that? And that's fine. It's an interesting question.
Yeah.
So maybe I can start with no. I'm going to parlay off of Hashmat said before is our client data is by far the most important thing we have, right? We're not going to in any way, shape, or form risk that by selling it. When I think of future technologies, something we are looking at, again, not for selling, but just another way to create more security is this idea of synthetic data. So not actually using the client data anymore, but creating patterns within this data that are similar. But again, not to sell it. This is just another layer of security we can put on it.
Yeah,
I totally agree. No, so the short answer is no. More broadly, we are looking at leveraging other sources of data, though. So one of the key things we're looking at is how do we deliver more data differentiated, smarter insurance products, resiliency products, preventative products. But that doesn't mean we are selling our data, but we are leveraging new sources of data to make sure that we come up with new value propositions. Think of telematics products, think of smart home insurance products, think of all of these, edge computing with, all sensors being everywhere. How can we tap into our partner ecosystems data and make sure that we can embed our product, our services in a more meaningful, more personalized manner in our partner ecosystems client journey? So in those senses, we are thinking of new ways of using partner data. However, I'm not aware of any instance of us reselling our data. That's kind of our crown jewels. And of course, we talked earlier about legislation, consent, and privacy, and all of that comes in.
Well, I think the question felt like it was targeted at that as like, sort of the, not to call them out, but like the Google approach or Facebook, it's like you, the customer, actually the product, and we're selling that to others, and that's how we monetize. But Hashmat, you made this comment about preventative. And so it's, what do we know about you and the data that you're throwing off from IoT or just from transacting with us that we could, maybe it's not to sell, but to offer back to you to inform and to guide and to help you be more resilient to risk yourself. And so the fact that we have this proliferation of data, better tools to understand it, new ways of interacting with you, are we finding ways maybe not to have a sellable product, but a value add to, at least Joe, I think is to your point, is like moving more to being that advisor, that source of trust, instead of just someone who's there to sell products to you. Maybe that's a nicer idea than sort of like, let's all turn into Facebook and not charge and just secretly sell everything on the back end. I'm not biased. I'm not saying I hate Facebook, but is that sort of thing starting to come into play more?
It is already here. That future already exists. So, if you look at telematics products, for example, traditionally we used to have dongles. Nowadays, car manufacturers, properties. If you think about your house, think of a new car, 2022, 2023 car. It's a computer on wheels. How do we tap into that data to provide more, to help the drivers become safer drivers, to give them new incentives to be more safer, to give them discounts, to there's also behavior economics that we can bake into that journey map. So that's already been in the market for quite a while, but that will continue to evolve, and that is also expanding into commercial insurance with IoT sensors everywhere. It's also going into life insurance. I'm sure you have heard of life insurance carriers have programs where they tap into your Fitbit data and they can track your health and they can give you incentives and programs and engages you. And again, that goes into more prevention rather than protection. How can we prevent you having a loss? And if we can do that, of course, there's win-win for both the client as well as the carrier. So absolutely, there are, we are becoming more, like edge computing is everywhere now, and we are more, generating more data by engaging with these systems, and technology infrastructure is evolving. So the question for insurance carriers is, how do we remain relevant? And customers are expecting experiences that are personalized, They're expecting more smarter insurance products. So how does a traditional product become smarter without tapping into this new source of data? How do we make a quote and buy experience 3 clicks or 1 click or 1 question rather than the dozens of questions we ask them? How do we engage in pre-fill? So all of those already exist. It's just going to become more and more prevalent. As I will quote something famous, I can't recall who said this, but the future is already here. It's just not uniformly distributed.
Any other comments to add to that?
I think that the essence of what a broker does is that they take in information and they make recommendations to a client, right? Like that is the fact that we are going to use technology more and more to support that process makes sense. It's the core, component of what that business model is. It's just basically trying to understand the client's needs, and brokers are great at it. They can look at somebody, they take in information when they're in person, they just like suck it all in, like what's going on with that person, then they provide some context so that that person can make a good decision. And yes, we'll leverage technology to do that better and to do that across different channels. But I think it's just the exact model we've always done. We're just expanding the way we do it.
Yeah. Sam, anything to add on your part?
I would agree. It's with Lisa Joy there. It's the same model that we've already had. It's client is going to give us information, and they want value in return for that information, right? So whether it's a couple check boxes on an application form, or to Hashmat's point, your Fitbit recording everything you're doing, right? There always has to be that value, and of course the trust for giving that deeper and deeper level of information.
Mm-hmm.
We're in a weird spot now because we've got 3-4 minutes left. We've just had some really pressing and I think big questions come through. I'm like, we don't have time to touch these, but we have more time than is fair to just say, okay, let's just end early. So I want to do sort of a lightning round on one of them, if that's okay. The question was, do you have an explicit digital future state mission statement? And so is digital at the center of how you as an organization envision yourself? And what I would say as a nuance of that is you can give me a yes, no, but what I'd love to know is it the holistic enterprise, or is it for, a particular piece of the business, or it's like, this is our digital business and the rest of the mothership continues on as is. So, is digital a core piece of the future of the mission? And if so, is it just for one piece, or is it's gotten to the point where it's now the whole thing and not just for our innovation arm or this side unit or subsidiary? Does anyone want to jump in on that? And this will probably be where we finish things off.
So yes, digital capabilities. Also, we have to separate what do we mean by digital, because digital could mean digital channels, digital capabilities. More broadly, though, digital analytics and automation is at the heart of our strategy. And again, we have a guided omni strategy. So, digital and digitization will give us those business capabilities that will allow us to stay relevant as the market landscape changes around us.
Great. Anyone else want to chime in before we go?
Sure. Same as Hashmat. Like, yes, digital is core, but not every experience is going to be digital.
So still room for the people side. Yeah, Sam.
I agree. Yes, it's at the heart. It's for the whole enterprise, and even the omni approach eventually falls back into digital at some point in time.
Yeah, I think we're still in this place where some organizations have, that's our digital unit, and so their future is digital, and we still don't know for the rest. But I think what we're hearing is, if that's the case, that's temporal, and we will get to a place where data, even if that's what digital means in that context, or the customer experience or the way we trade with our partners, there's no question digital transformations was not just a response to the pandemic. It wasn't just about enabling remote work and remote adjusting and all that. It is a core to how business will happen, whether you're just personal lines or commercial lines or a mix of the two, or life and health. It doesn't matter. We've started on that journey. This wasn't you just had to adjust for the the lockdowns and now we're all set. We've digitally transformed and we're done. It's the beginning of a journey. And so hearing from three very different organizations that have set that strategy going forward and recognize it's a core to who we are, I think reinforces that. So thank you to Hashmat, to Sam, to Lisa Joy, and to all of you for joining us for this conversation. Really, really valuable. And I hope to see everybody in September in Toronto for the Future of Insurance Canada. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay.
Goodbye.